Welcome back. Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and former National Security Advisor to President Obama, Susan Rice. Her recent book is Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. She also recently wrote a New York Times op-ed entitled Washington, D.C. Deserves Statehood. Very great to have you on the show this morning. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Susan. We want to talk about your op-ed on D.C. statehood, also about the remarkable events of the last couple of weeks. I wonder first, though, if you'll talk about Donald Trump's unilateral decision to withdraw from Germany and how many foreign policy leaders on both the right and the left, both Republicans and Democrats, are extremely worried that this is a big win for Vladimir Putin.
Well, good morning, Joe. Good morning, Meek. It's good to be with you both. The withdrawal from Germany, which the president apparently decided on his own without any consultation with one of our closest allies, is another very serious self-inflicted wound in terms of our security and our global standing. We have long had a very important military presence in Germany. That presence is there for many different reasons, but among them as a place to prepare for and ready, if necessary, NATO and aligned forces in the event of Russian aggression. And for the president to unilaterally declare the withdrawal of about a third of those troops over the objections of the German government underscores the fragility of NATO and President Trump's lack of commitment to the alliance, which is a gift, as you said, Joe, for Vladimir Putin, and it puts our security at greater risk. It's just shameful.
I would like to ask you about Washington, D.C., and your belief that it does deserve statehood. This has been an ongoing quest. But you make the case in a recent piece that the events of the past 2 weeks really underscore, drive home the reason why D.C. should be a state. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Mika. I think most Americans don't understand that there's 700,000, more than 700,000 American citizens in the District of Columbia. They don't have voting rights in the Senate or the House, and they have no degree of sovereignty or autonomy, so that when President Trump wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, as he did about 10 days ago, and decides to send heavily armed federal forces, helicopters, Humvees, into the District of Columbia against the will of the mayor, he can do that. Statehood has long been an aspiration for the citizens of the district. We pay more taxes per capita than any state in the union. We pay more absolute taxes and total taxes than 22 states. Our population exceeds that of Wyoming and Vermont, and it's comparable to several other states, and yet we are denied these voting rights. And so it is time. There's legislation that is pending in the House, H.R. 51, that would make D.C. a state. We've satisfied all of the prerequisite requirements. And if the Senate and the House and the president were to sign legislation to that effect, we would eventually become the 51st state. Now, obviously, while it might pass the House, there's no chance of it passing the Senate or this president signing it, which is, in my judgment, one more reason for sweeping change in November.
Really?
Ambassador Rice, it's Willie Geist. This has obviously been out in the atmosphere for a long time. Residents of D.C. want some representation as they're being taxed. But why now? Why the push right now? Do you see something particularly urgent in this moment about getting statehood for D.C.?
Well, yes, Willie. I mean, the reason it is so urgent is because we've seen in very painful and frankly violent terms what the lack of statehood can bring to the residents of the District of Columbia. We had federal forces beating up citizens of the District of Columbia in front of the White House. That could not happen without the consent of a governor if we were a state, or at least there would be a very high bar to be crossed legally for that to happen. So last week, with the unilateral deployment of all kinds of forces, many of them without markings, without insignia, without any clear chain of command, in here doing some very disruptive and frightening things to largely peaceful protesters, to me underscores the urgency and the necessity of statehood, particularly when you have someone in the White House who could care less about the people of the District of Columbia and using us, frankly, as a political prop to bolster his so-called law and order credentials. And frankly, also, Willie, to spark the kind of violence that I think that would be beneficial in his judgment to him politically. Now, we do not need racially charged battles on the streets of the District of Columbia or any other part of this country. And thankfully, the residents of the city, the peaceful protesters, didn't take the bait and rise to the provocation. But I think there's no question that it can be perceived as a provocation.
You know, Madam Ambassador, as you certainly know far better than me, the march toward civil rights has been a long and torturous one over the past 400 years in the United States. Obviously, some dates stand out. 1865, the end of the Civil War. 1963 through 1965, from Martin Luther King's March on Washington to the Civil Rights and the Voting Acts of 64 and 65, the election of Barack Obama in 2008. I'm wondering where 2020 stands in your mind in that march forward to a more perfect union.
Well, Joe, obviously it's a little too soon to say, but I hope very much that 2020 will go down in the history books as the year when finally America truly recognized that we are still combating systemic racism, not only in our police and our law enforcement apparatus, but in many aspects of our society, from housing to education to health care. And we have a moment. What we have seen across this country, these multiracial, multi-generational, largely peaceful protests in recognition of this disparity, in recognition of these injustices, and a real call, unlike any that I've seen in my lifetime of some 55 years, for radically changing a system that has oppressed African Americans and people of color in this country. I think it can be done, but frankly, the jury is out. The protests have been powerful. They've been very moving, particularly their character, that they have attracted the support of so many across this country, those that have come out to protest and those that are cheering them on from the sidelines. But a key critical test will be something you talked about earlier in the show, which is whether fundamental legislation, such as the Justice and Policing Act that has been introduced in the House and the Senate by Democrats, can gain bipartisan support. There is really nothing radical in that bill whatsoever. It's common sense stuff, banning chokeholds, banning no-knock entries for suspected drug cases, having a registry of offenders so that they can't move from one city to the next. These are common sense things. But if the Republicans in Congress and the White House cannot come on board with this, then I think this will be a moment that underscores how deeply entrenched all of this is and how much radical change is needed at the ballot box to make it clear that we need leadership in the House and the Senate and the White House and that will support these kinds of changes that the American people now recognize are long overdue.
I wanted to ask you before you go about the man who held the position that you held briefly, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and the condemnation by the retired judge yesterday on the developments pertaining to his case. It is obviously very strong words used in terms of how this has been dealt with. But what next? I don't think anyone expected. This is very uncharted territory. What's the oversight? What's the consequence, though, down the road?
Well, Mika, I'm afraid this is not a subject I can personally share much light on. I read the articles reporting on the federal judge's assessment of the situation, but I'm not a legal expert, and I will, like every other American, watch to see how this plays out.
Fair enough. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, thank you very much for being on with us this morning. Again, your new memoir is entitled Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. Susan, thank you so much. All right.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.